Alrighty. That should be us going live. So, hey there. I am Chris from Airwindows, and we're going to do some more coding and all this kind of stuff. Probably not going to wait for people to show up either. I can't stay super long today, and I've got more than a little bit to do. Got some ideas. Dudecraft, hey there. I will set up Lorenzo some of our stuff, like the chat window. I'm aware my video feed looks weird, but I don't have all my lighting going so fancy today. And I'm going to be in a little tiny window momentarily, so it's all good. Although before I do, if you didn't see this, go on to the website, because I now have the Airwindows chord slide rule, and it's a PDF. So you print this out and cut it out as needed, and then you can have one of these too. There, downloading Papercraft. But what I'm thinking of doing today is more along the lines of, first let me shuffle my cables around so I don't cause problems there. We're going to jump right into this. Hit the wrong button. There we go. And we'll go with that. So, yeah. Don't mind me, I'm always like shuffling around these windows and things. I feel that's just going to have to be part of the experience. Got our stream going. Got the desktop showing. Here's what we're going to do. Here is the GitHub repository, just as we had it before, including our new plugin. So this is the one that we just put out. This is Mackity. It's one stage of Mackie 1202 style distortion and or slam, and people are eager to see this be developed further. You're not going to see it next week. It's going to take a little bit longer than that, but there's no reason to not start to give it a try. So what we're going to do firstly is fire up a new project. It's not going to be a stereo, so I don't select that option. And how am I doing? Doing all right. I have a lot of work in store, but that's usual. And I'm kind of excited about a couple of things. One of them is I have to fix my car up a little bit, but since I have to do things like get a steering rack for it, I found a way to do a cooler steering rack than it already had. The steering rack I've got is a bog standard 2014 base Subaru Impreza. Turns out you can put the steering rack from a 2015 STI on there. The standard one is like 18:1 or something, with a big neutral zone in the center, so that when you're wobbling the wheel as you're driving down the highway, nothing much happens. And the STI is a 13:1 without a dead zone in the center. So it will make the car feel more nimble and interesting. And seeing as I have to replace the steering rack anyway, I might as well do it with something that's fun. Also, and more cheaply, I was able to get some coilovers, so the car is going to be more planted, and it'll be like, I'm a little race car, vroom vroom. Even though it won't be any more powerful or any faster, which is fine because when I drive around, I have for years. I used to have an old Buick that I did this to. I enjoy driving a car that's nimble and feels planted on the ground, and you can feel the terrain you're going over and stuff. It feels like you could do crazy cornering around things and it wouldn't go crazy on you. But I never floor it. So getting more power into this Subaru is a waste of time. It's a 2014 Subaru with the 2.0 liter engine, and there's no turbos for it, and there's no fancy things for the engine at all. It does get good fuel economy though, and it's the same engine as goes into the Crosstreks. Actually, there are turbos for it, but I don't trust them. Seems like it's crazy people in Australia doing mad turbo experiments for literally everything, and it's quite expensive to do that, as well as being a super crazy experiment. So what I'm doing is fixing the busted steering rack, which the power steering cuts out on me sometimes, and taking the opportunity to do some other stuff that I'll enjoy and not trying to make it faster at all, because that's not even going to matter. Bro, why would I want to kill all the other companies? I do open source software. Other companies can use what I do. There's already a guy out there. He wrote me a nice note saying, can I do this? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. It's the dude that has put out a plugin called the Incinerator. And it's like some kind of metal canister that he's got a impulse response of. And the idea is that you do various sorts of distortion and whatever, and you also do this impulse response. And then he's got some of my reverb stuff tacked onto the end, and he seems very grateful for being able to do that. He's not releasing his code, so if I wanted to do something based off of his stuff, I wouldn't be able to, but I'm not using the GPL license, I'm using the MIT license. Explicitly to set up people like that. Only thing about it is, like, if he does code of his own, you can't necessarily have it. But if you just want the bits of Airwindows stuff that he used, you can have that. That's how that works. So, no, this is not about killing other companies. What I do facilitates other people being able to do their own interesting things that I wouldn't want to do or wouldn't be interested to do. So yeah, we're currently sitting here looking on a new project, because the next thing for me to do is to do the one with EQ bands. And I even have a audio file that I can play that will demonstrate that. And I've got some ideas for how I can start to implement it. We're probably talking about the same person or the same company making the Australian rebuilds of Chinese turbos, because it's a particular Australian turbo maker who seem to be quite enthusiastic about their stuff, and they seem to know what they're doing. So yeah, more power to them, or more power from them, since they're turbo makers. But I don't feel I'm going to need to do that, because like I said, I enjoy driving a Subaru or any car really, that's lively and planted and feels like vroom vroom. I'm a race car, but I don't floor it. I don't go fast. I just like going around corners and having it feel like it's really settled and under control. And it's almost like if you're a motorcycle rider and you're going around and you feel like you're really part of the experience, it's the same kind of deal. So yeah, let's think of a name for the new plugin, because it's not going to be Mackity 2. It's going to be some advancement on that. Probably not with the itty ending, because I've done that twice now, Verbity and Mackity. Everything doesn't need to end with that. And I'm going to want to include the EQ, so and I'm comfortable. I've been working hard, so if I spend the entire time here sitting around trying to think of a name, that's going to have to be fine, but I'll probably come up with one momentarily. It's not like I couldn't rename it afterwards. I don't have to be stuck at this stage. But yeah. I would like it to start with MIC so it sits in the same basic place. So if somebody is like, where do I get that one that's like a Mackie? Let's look in the alphabetical list under Mackie. Ultimate Desk starts with U, so that's not going to work. And Desk is one of my plugin lines as well, which is a more simplified thing than this. This is essentially distortion box variations. I've already got a transformer plugin. You might not recognize it because it's called Interstage, but that's essentially what that is. It's maybe not the most advanced transformer plugin. I'll be showing you the sound characteristics of the 1202 EQ momentarily, as soon as I figure out let's just we'll call it that. Because technically you would be able to use it as an EQ, but everybody is going to know, like, the reason you would go for this is to slam it and distort it and do crazy things with it. So our first thing is to set this up and quickly copy everything over. MKTY, MKEQ seems good enough for me. I'll move these things where you can see them when I start actually working with them. Some of this stuff is going to be walking through this process. This is the kind of stuff I have to do fairly often. Like, I try to do things, like when I finally manage to do the M1 stuff, it's going to be very similar in that I'll work out a process and then I'll start, like, patiently walking through all of this stuff by bit by bit. And this, I can tell this to be 0.1. But you know, the rest of this can kind of leave alone. We'll put that there for the moment and have all that stuff in the middle. Price, interesting thought. You're welcome to do it, seeing as it's MIT licensed and all. You're going to have to stay busy because I'll keep putting a new thing in every week. And here's the deal is they're not really that decoupled from the VST and AU frameworks, but I try to have stuff be fairly methodical. So like what I'm doing right now involves having some global variables here. And this is a couple of biquad filters and it's some IIR samples. There's going to be more of those, so keep an eye out. It is absolutely and totally not a linear phase EQ. It's a Mackie 1202 EQ. And I can't promise anything like a formulaic approach to it, but all of the plugins tend to be pretty similar. Like, watch for the variations and do the best you can. That's all I can do. I'm moving forwards too fast to do an awful lot as far as walking people through formularizing these things. Like right now, what I got to do is get this ported so I can close this one and start working on this one. We're going to leave all of those controls in place. All those will stay the same. A bunch of that stuff is just... One interesting thing about the new Xcode that I'm beginning to work with as I grapple with the M1 stuff is that it's got an easier way of peeking into things like the dependencies and stuff. Like this is all very well and good, but the new one, you've got all this stuff that you can click on where it's like, oh, where is the definition of component result initialize? And you can look at that, and you can look at the code and the header files quite easily and simply. So that's neat. And yeah, like the more people adapt this stuff to their own purposes, the better pleased I will be. Like I'm over 50 years old, I'm not going to be around forever. And it's one of the reasons I buy like synthesizer parts and stuff. It's like, what point is there in the world other than like throwing together modular synths and making music with them and doing stuff like that? You know, I ask you. And so here, let's put a space here. And let's copy some of this stuff while I'm at it. But yeah, like the whole idea of, like maybe if I was 18, I would feel differently about like, oh, I'm going to conquer all the other manufacturers and I'll make them all eat crap and they'll all fail and I'll win super hard. And at this point, I'm more interested in like what kind of foundation can I build for people who are moving on beyond what I'm doing. And that's why it's cool seeing folks like that guy with his incinerator plugin. And it doesn't have to be anything that I would even want to do. You know, in fact, I wouldn't. I'm not particularly interested. He was like, oh, you want a copy? I'm like, that's fine. But the fact is that's somebody who's able to move forwards and do his thing. And that's really kind of what I'm about. That's the legacy I would like to leave. Having a big pile of money in a bank account is stupid and meaningless compared with being able to set people up to do interesting things that they enjoy. That is made of win. So we're on the same page there. Let's see now. Gonna quickly remove that and this, and we don't need this, that's just there. And for laughs, I'm going to take that out. And this is now exactly the same as it was. I'm going to tack it back in under here so that I can grab these and use them if I want. And then this stuff over here, I'm straight up going to just take and run with. And we're going to not, we're not doing dry samples for this stuff. I would rather it, well, I'm very tempted to, but the thing is, this becomes like a sound design type of thing. So, I'm not sure. I guess we'll see. Modern, I'm old. You mean modern, me being modern, huh? So the remaining thing is, this is what Mackity is. See how little that is? See how cute it is? That's all that is. It's one stage. That's what we're going to go beyond. And you know something? I am going to leave the drive up because somebody would just be asking me for it. Oh, but hang on. I should make this go away. There. Now we should have Mackity, but now with a dry wet control. And really, people were commenting on gear sluts about gear. I can't believe I said that. I've actually been quite approving of their name change. Gear Space. For a while I was calling it Gear Suds because I thought that would be amazing. I had said, like, yeah, I know it doesn't null completely with the capture of the analog version of that same file, and there's a variety of reasons for that. And I said, yeah, but the thing is, it gets the vibe better than other stuff that might go push harder to try to mimic and cancel out the exact thing. And somebody responded and was like, yeah, that's nonsense when people go about that. Please don't. I don't mean to attack you, but I hate it when people talk that way. Here's the deal. This is why it has the vibe that it does. This is the audio code right here. Best way to follow up with me is talk to me on Mondays. Talk to me when I'm coding and doing live streams, especially on Mondays when I'm doing coding. This is a good time for me to be answering questions and talking about this stuff. Somebody was asking me for an expander. I haven't got that at the moment, but it's a doable thing. Matthias is asking about channel 8, 9 being different from channel 7. I don't remember exactly why. I think that was when I got into the modeling of actual capacitor behavior, which is not the case, strangely, in Mackity. But it's a thing that you can do, and I incorporated that into recent channels. And so that's, I would look for that. Look into capacitor 2, which also uses those same changes, and live streams that I did at the time when I was talking about what I was learning then. Like, I've had that going on. So yeah, firstly, let's build this and see if it builds. It probably will, but not the first time, because in this old version of Xcode, you have to build the bases first. Only then can it make any sense of that stuff. It tries to build those afterwards, which is silly, but there you go. Then when you try to build it again, it's fine. So we don't need that. We'll skip out of here, and we're working on this and going to this, the release folder. There's our new component. Since this is an older machine, I can actually fool with it as we go. And we've got our same, like, this is the file that we use, and this is my reference for the EQ stuff. Yeah, well, I mean, the reason I do stuff the way that I do is because you can use an older version of it. Hopefully that will continue to be, like, there should be a version of all the different channel numbers coming out for the M1 processor on the new Macs. Not just the most recent one. All of them need to be incorporated, and it's likewise for when I did the VST plugin, when I incorporated Linux into there. All the little variations are included, and so you should continue to have access to the older stuff. That's kind of why I do the stuff that I do, the way that I do it. And what we've got here, this is the Mackie 1202. Fooling with the knobs. And it's got lots more gain, or less gain, or turn up all the bass. And so we're going to be doing a plugin that can do this. Or here's the opposite. This is all the highs. I had to follow this up by doing the just only input stage one. And that's what I was referring to for the last few weeks. I wasn't referring to this, but I had this before. And I think this is what just the mids sound like. This is all the bass and all the treble cranked up. This is all the bass, but no gain, or less gain. Still quite a bit of gain, actually. So I should be able to get tones exactly like this when I get the EQ stuff going, which we've got about an hour and a half, so I'm not going to have it all today, but we can start. And likewise, if I turn up the highs and turn down the lows all the way, you can get this. This, again, is the real mixer. And that's lots of gain. And I've also got a reference thing, which is sine waves and things. I'm fooling with the sines a lot. So if I run sine waves into the model, I should be able to do these things with it as well. Again, there's a lot of distortion in there. And the deal with some of this stuff, I don't know whether I have an actual noise example in here. Probably not. But if I fire up, for instance, span, we can see that I have different kinds of emphasis, but this is the farthest from a brick wall filter you could possibly ask for. Especially when you're distorting it so hard. Those EQs might sound like they're doing a lot. And if we increased the intensity of this so it was, like 72 to 24 dB, which is still kind of a lot. We can do this. I might remember it. But these are the frequency changes we're getting out of it. And there's our mid-range, and as you can see, there's still a lot left. Like when we're not boosting the highs or boosting the lows. This is me turning the highs down. That's what's left in the mids. So I have a game plan as far as how to get this. And firstly, which I forgot to do just now, but what we'll do is confirm that the new thing is in fact working. Here's our raw file. What plugin would I suggest for adding warm budgie saturation for bass? Heck, you could try Mackity. I just did one that does a pretty good job at that. It has particular characteristics that work pretty well with it. So let's see. There's Mackity and there's Mackie Q. This is now our output pad. No, wait, 9th is our output pad. So here's Mackity with some of its things rearranged. So now it has lots of extra controls. And sure enough, that sounds like Mackity to me. So we're ready to go beyond here's how we're going to go about doing that. I'm going to take a additional approach here. I don't know how many of these high-pass stages I need to include, because every stage is going to have a high-pass filter just to block signals going through, and it will matter. And they're going to be exactly the same as one of these IIR samples. That's going to continue to be there throughout. But I'm talking about doing an entirely different set. So I have three things in mind here. And by that I mean we've got a 2-band EQ, but I'm going to model it as 3 bands with these really shallow IIR samples. But I'm also going to be having 2 poles of IIR, which is still not going to be as steep as a biquad. It's going to be quite different. And here's the deal. I'm making it into 3 bands, but I'm only going to be manipulating the amplitude of 2 of them. Let's start. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to rename these to relevant things. You could also make an array out of them, but I'm not worried about making an array out of them. I like doing stuff this way because I kind of know what I'm doing about it. Actually, I've got go try bass drive. Bass drive is a I think it's actually a biquad based filter, but it's specifically doing EQ bands, but the amplitude for each band is density rather than being a simple level change. So what you can do is kind of saturate just only the bass and have it filtered, and that's what I'm going to be doing with this. So technically, this is going to become exactly what you're asking for, because that's present in the Mackie. When you're saturating the lows in the Mackie, the way it's acting is, on the one hand, the distortion of the little op amp in there, it's got that smoothness and warmth, but I'm also convinced that it is filtering the output. It's filtering the clipping out of the boost going into that, so you can slam the hell out of that low band in the physical hardware Mackie and not hear a bunch of high frequency or mid-range stuff grinding through. So that's what I've got in mind. And here's the deal. If I was just doing only a low and a high band, I can do that in here by going, here's IIR sample C, here's IIR sample D. What I'm going to do is filter what's coming out of the first stage, what's coming out of what we've got already. We're just tacking this onto the end. I might even put a little comment in there being like, okay, end Mackity onto the EQ phases. And then if I was divvying it up into a pair of frequency bands by going, here's IIR sample C, we're going to set the frequencies that it uses, and then we're going to subtract the, like, are you familiar with how that works? Let's do this to start off with. First thing I can do is walk people through how this works. And first thing I'll do here is generate DEF. We'll blank those out. every step of the way we're going to be including this DC block thing going in here so that it doesn't start eating a lot of CPU, which the IIR filters can do on some machines. Strangely, not all of them. Like, this laptop is ancient, and yet it doesn't seem to have a problem with it. I don't know why that is. But yeah, we've got our long doubles. We've got this. Now, we can go, let's just use these. Oh, actually, no, we can't use these. We gotta, otherwise it'll blank that out. Now we're gonna have a lot of warnings saying, we didn't use this variable. See, it says unused variable. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna start using some of those. And we're going to use this same format, IR amount. Float 64 and double are effectively the same thing, so I'm not particularly worried about that. But so if we do this, we see that we have those already set up. And in fact, I can throw some more in for more interstage stuff in case the base gets too big and sloppy and needs to be tightened up. I'm going to have a final output stage to go through. So some of these things are going to need to be repeated. Like everything that I have here in Mackity is going to be echoed as a output mixing stage, and then I'm going to have this EQ stuff sitting between it. So essentially I'm just going to double it up, and that will mean I'll be able to get crazy high gain stuff, because that's one of the things people want out of this particular concept. People want to do what I did in the Mackity video of like just option drag it into an empty space and make two of them, both of them heavily distorted. All of a sudden the distortion went completely bonkers. People want that, and they want to be able to run like the EQ as well and just fiddle with the bass and then overload that into another channel and so on, and just stack them up. Do enough of that and things get completely and totally bonkers. And that's what people want to do, so we're going to facilitate that. Thing is, let's mark some of this stuff out. See, that the person who was asking me about how to port all the plugins to a default sort of library-like format, this is the kind of stuff that I do to help facilitate that. In fact, one thing I could do here is, let's go and duplicate it as an output stage before even putting in the EQ stuff. I've got this here ready to be applied to a EQ on the middle, but our stuff here doesn't actually require that. What I'm going to have is a whole set of more biquads that are, well, actually no. I'm going to need to tune those in, because the input stage needs to be the way that it is, because that's present in the actual thing. But I'm not going to want to simply double it. So we'll leave the biquads alone for the moment. And the IIR filter, that is controlling sort of the DC blockage inside the circuit. So this is the capacitor on the input, and it's set to handle that accurately. This is the capacitor inside the machine after it's done its little distortion phase. So going from stage to stage, instead of going just to the output, this is now feeding the filters. So we're going to use that to feed the filters. We're going to use the biquad to like boost highs or whatever. And then after we do the filters that we're going to do, which are a different form of, the filters are more IIR stuff, and we'll be setting that up as seen here. We're going to have an entirely other stage of Mackity as a output op amp. Like it'll go through the EQ stuff, and that'll have its own filtering and things going on, and then the output of that's going to go through another stage of op amp just to distort more and do more crazy things. And the input filter from that one is going to be this rather than the input filter of the entire circuit. It's going to be this much smaller level, but it's still going to be there. So I'll have a sort of additional level of DC blockage going through the entire thing, and that will help it be... Q is going to be hilarious. Q is nothing for here because it is a IIR filter, meaning it almost doesn't have one. It's like a tilt EQ practically. I'm going to be tuning these to fit, but it's going to be pretty funny the way that it works out. However, the output stage, the duplicate of Mackity sitting after this, there's going to be another, Mackie, I'll probably call it output stage. And that's what the EQ feeds, because you're going through the entire rest of the mixing board at this stage. And there's no insert point after the EQs. So the stuff that you do with EQ can be made to distort yet another stage, and that will help it kind of glue and hold together. But I won't want that doing the same boostiness, because I've got a certain amount of high frequency boost on that input stage. And it's correct if, it's correct or maybe even a little bit subdued. But I can't just use it twice. I'm going to need to do one where the biquad, after the clipping stage, because we've got input biquad filtering out the highs, the clipping stage, and then the output is a little more resonant. This is the one that has Q. This is the one that has a slightly higher Q. And if I double that up, if I just naively double it up, that's not going to be helpful. Plus, I don't even know if it's quite the same frequency. What I've got here is essentially a hair over 19K is what dialed in the tone, but I'm going to be listening to an entirely different audio file. Namely, I'm going to be doing this. So when I do actually build this, we're going to be doing stuff like cranking the highs like this, and then fiddling with the frequency in Q until it feels about the same. So we're going to be cranking the highs as far as they'll go, and seeing what we can do to make it resemble this behavior. Or here's the low without it being super distorted. As you can see, the low doesn't distort as much as the highs, so it's going to be a similar behavior still. That's highs not overly cranked. Here's highs cranked as far as they'll go. So we're going to make this feel right. And that may very well be different settings. That's not necessarily exactly the same frequencies. I gotta do it by ear. I gotta fool with it until it sounds right when we're done with it. So first things first, I'm chattering away about what I'm not going to do. Let's make something happen here that we can actually hear. I was going to explain what IIR filters were about. So we've got these controls available. We can, in fact, add this to all these because it relates. That will still build. We're not using any of them. And what we do next is take this code here and apply it somewhere else. So after the input stage, we put this in. And it's much the same, really. But we're using a different value for it. So what we're going to have is this is going to be what we start with. So we're going to be starting with that. And what we have here is we could say let's steal this code, and input sample will now equal and instead of using wet, let's use slider 9. That's a 0 to 1 value. We're not going to keep this, but this will show you what it does. I have forgotten to do a thing. There we go. I forgot to do that. And this should work just fine, and is making some of the variables that I need. And now we're applying it back again so we can hear what we made. Over to Finder, copy it over, go here. I haven't labeled stuff, which is a little bit tiresome, but that only means these are our IIR filters. And, oh, hang on, I've screwed up. Let me quit out of here. Oh, I quit the wrong thing. Okay, let me quit out of here. I'm screwing up left and right. Let's walk through some of this stuff more patiently so I don't screw up as much. I think everything was saved because I had to build it. Yep. So the deal here is I should be fixing some of these things. That's what we're actually doing. 10 is dry wet, not outpad, so that's wrong. 9 is, in fact, outpad. So 8 would be what we're temporarily looking at. So saving that and then making yeah, output is get parameter 9. So we do not need to double that up. And that means that slider 8, is that what I've got? Yes, it is. Yeah. There we go. It'll make sense in a moment. So now, presuming this still builds and works, which it does, it's still warning me about all the unused stuff, but that's fine. Let's go and put this here. And now I can demonstrate to you what IIR filters do properly. So we've got our distortion. And this is the first filter we're using. This has an effect. But this is blending between apparently a big scream and nothing. That's weird. Okay, time to debug. I don't know why it's doing this, so let's find out. It was supposed to bring this in. We are defining base sample. We are making it be IIR sample C. And it is doing something. So for some reason, we're not able to get output out of base sample. And we're applying it like this. So oh, hello. Is that why is? Get param 2. So what I'm doing is trying to get this to work. Oh, and I know exactly why it's supposed to work. I made a mistake here. Can you see where the mistake is? IIR amount A is that divided by overall scale, not get sample rate. Get sample rate is a number. If I'm running at 44.1K, get sample rate is 44,100. So IIR amount 2 is this number divided by that. I did not want that. I was looking here. That's the wrong place to look. I should have been looking here. This is what will adapt my IIR filters properly. This is the wrong place to look. So I did that wrong, and we're going to fix it now. And we'll do it for these other ones while I'm at it. That was a simple mistake. That's why it was doing what it was doing. So effectively, it was making the low-pass filter always be an incredibly low cutoff low-pass filter. I was never able to make it go up to a higher frequency. This should change that. It was a silly mistake. You should hear it momentarily. So here's what IIR filters will do for you. If temp is over here, we're hearing bass sample. If temp is over here, we're hearing mid sample. And when we combine them together, we have the original output back again. We're going to need to cross it over a lot lower. So this might start sounding a little bit more like the actual filter, except for we're going to make it a bit steeper. And we're looking for a fixed frequency. And what we're going to end up doing is making it so we've got like a low frequency from here, and then there's going to be mid-range, and then a high frequency from like maybe here. It's not going to go as high as this, but it's going to be around here somewhere. And each of these are defined in terms of each other. So let's set that up now. After all, we've got these filter things ready to go. In fact, we have so many of them that we can double it up. Because we're going to eventually So as you can see, what we've got now is these are just variables that we can grab and do stuff with, but we've now got two different sets of filters that I can make out of this. I can do a filtering with C, and then go and do it again with D, and likewise for E and F. And the reason we're doing this is that we're not going to distort the mid-range, but we're going to independently distort the highs and lows in exactly the same way that Mackity already distorts. We're going to use this code in the middle of the EQ bands. And having done so, the EQ bands will then filter again, and so we'll get a little touch of the op-amp distortion inside each of the EQ bands that's not mid-range. And again, the reason we're leaving mid-range out, let's go into the H file. If we can, let's open the H file. Two and three. And then we can use 4, 5, and 6 as these. And we're not going to keep the control on the mids because the accurate thing is to have it go unity gain. But I can show you what that does. I'm going to go and look at what the things are actually labeled later. So now 4, 5, and 6 are what I'm going to be looking for. And quickly make them match. I won't necessarily have them be just unity gain, but for now I can. They're probably going to end up being a similar boostiness to the other stuff. And have a look at chat while I'm at it, because I think stuff has gotten past me. Not all that much. So let's see, we've got IR filters ready to roll for all this stuff. All we have to do is copy it and multiply it. So what we can do here is, and there it is. So let's quickly whip this into shape. D, E, F. And I think I can do a bit of find and replace here if I do it carefully. Looking good so far. Hold down Option in this older version to do the stuff within the selection, and I have to make sure that I keep selecting it. Alrighty, so now what we've got is we are filtering super hard. And technically this isn't applying any of this stuff. What it's doing is it's just making these all in parallel from the same beginning. It's taking input sample each time and it's not doing anything with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply this way. Hang on, no, I did that wrong. This is the one I want. We're making IR sample C, and not only that, we are going to distort the inside of this filter. See, we've made this, and this is now our filtered thing. We can probably even listen to what we've got so far. So we've made the filtered thing. The filtered thing is now the one that has had the IR filter applied. Rather than just making it be input sample again, we're no longer using input sample directly. Instead, we're beginning the EQ section. This becomes a much darker version, and then rather than just taking the output again, we're going to distort that, and then we're going to filter it again. And then we're going to listen to the result of that, which is, again, the same frequency of whatever the second control is. And let's go with that right away. So it's now 2 poles. And we're still doing slider 8. And mid-sample is no longer the same thing, so we're going to adjust that so it still matches. In fact, let's move this up here, not that it'll matter for what we're doing right at the moment. And let's quickly have a listen to what we made happen. I'll be doing mixing sessions, Bro 77, when I'm actually doing more music. Some of the stuff that I'm doing is moving that direction, as I like to joke in my copious free time. Which is kind of funny because a fair amount, it's like being a cartoonist or something. Charles Schulz talked about that when he was doing the cartoon Peanuts, most amazing newspaper cartoon ever. He talked about how frustrating it was that if he wasn't physically drawing, people would be like, oh, hey, you're not doing anything, I can come and talk to you. And he's like, no, this is me thinking of what to do next. I have to put in a new comic every day. So some of the time that I'm spending staring out into space is letting this stuff settle so that he has a new comic to draw, at which point he begins drawing it, and that's not all of the work. I have to do, or choose to do, a new plugin every week. So some of my time is spent derping around and not doing anything particularly useful. And it looks like copious free time, but it kind of isn't. Back to this. Here's our bass control. But what we have, and these aren't doing anything at the moment, and this isn't doing anything at the moment, gain will probably be inside this. And what you're hearing now is 2 IAR filters. So come to think of it, I could apply that, couldn't I? So let's see. In trim, get parameter prim1 times 10. Well, these could be times 10. They're not necessarily what they're going to be, but they could be times 10. Gain mid isn't going to matter, so we're not going to worry about that. So, see where we've got our EQ section? See where we've got the distortion here? Gain bass. Now this has its own little distortion factor, but it's inside the filter. So we are giving it an already filtered thing. It's not going to have as much highs. Then it's clipping. It's clipping using the Mackity clipping function. And then it's filtering that again. So it's taking out some of the highs from the clipping function. And what we get, rather than what you just heard, and I'll make sure that everything is set properly. Here's what we're shooting for. This is what we're going to be trying to do. So now that's unity gain again. In that gain base is 1.0, gain mid is 1.0, gain high is 1.0, because these guys have got a multiply in there. And that I'm not sure what it is anymore, but we've got our output pad. This is between our high pass and our low pass. So we're now listening to only the output stage. And this is our frequency, that we're going to need to pick one that is appropriate, that it sounds like the real deal. And we can distort the input stage, but if we distort just the lows, wow, it went crazy. Wow, that's a lot of intensity. So yeah, this is much more delicate than I thought. Boy, this is inside the IAR filter. I didn't expect that, but this is the kind of thing we're going to be dealing with. And yeah, it's very sensitive. So if we control the gain base, what we'll get is like set a crossover point, This is between our lows and highs. This is flat. And this is what we start to get when we're adjusting the bass control on the mixer. If we pull it back, and if we boost it, actually that's weird. Something happened. We'll figure this out as we go. I got a solid half an hour or so to continue fooling with this, so that'll be amusing. Here's our crossover. And gain bass is a thing where we can start turning it up inside the filter. And it goes a little crazy. And we can turn it down inside the filter too. Although funny thing is, when we're doing that, we're not getting so here's our, okay, I think I know why this is doing. So there's a number of things going on here. I actually don't know what a TH like pure mix is, so here's what's happening. I'm crossing these over. I'm changing the gain, but I need to be not changing it here. I shouldn't be clipping this here. What I should be doing is crossing it over, like I've got two poles, and I need to be not applying the second pole before combining them. If that makes any sense. I'm not sure if it makes any sense. So here's the deal. We're no longer necessarily wanting to do this with it. Let's get the whole thing working, shall we? I feel like this might make a bit better sense. If I do this properly, and an important factor is I need to not be doing this gain here. So let's see, C and D. You may not be following what I'm doing. I'll try to catch you up once I have it making sense. Oh dear, that doesn't sound useful at all. So C and D are now our two cutoff points. E and F are what happens afterwards. And we're going to break everything into filters twice after we've overdriven them. But we have to divvy it up separately each time. Because here's what we're driving at. See, we've got begin EQ section. And see, we've got this stuff in here. And this is not how it's going to be, but our amount D is correct. So base sample is going to be C. This generates our first roll-off. The next thing that we do is we feed it into this other one, and then IR sample C is this divvied up even further. Like this is a roll-off, and this is another roll-off. So IR sample C is our first roll-off. Mid sample is input sample minus IR sample C, except for no, because this needs to live here. Mid sample is the one where the base stuff has been taken out, and then we feed that into the other filter. And then high sample is that's wrong, but I'll get it. You see how this works? So now we've got this filter here, and we're going to be doing something kind of like this. I think I was calling it high, right? Yeah. So all of this is doing EQ bands. Probably can't be, there's no dBs written on the Mackie controls, but I bet it's not going to be quite the same. This is not the input stage, so I'm going to have to gauge it differently, and that's work for another day. Right now I'm trying to just get it to work at all. So we're filtering. We've made IR sample C. That is the rolled off one. We're using that as base sample. That's where we go from there. Mid sample becomes input sample minus, there's no special reason we can't just call it that. And then IR sample D is another filter. It's using the mids. So what we have here is the lows, and then whatever the input stuff is with the lows taken out of it. Then we run that into this one, and this becomes the highs, in that we're taking more highs at a different frequency out of what was already taken. And so we're getting that mid-range tone. And we're already pretty much set up so that we can use the second control, param 3, to do it. I think we might, well, we're not going to hear it though. But here's how we will. I think that's what that was. We're still struggling with it, but this should at least show us something. No boosts anymore, instead we're just cutting. And in fact, we're going to take the distortion completely away for the moment. Just so we can be sure this works. We'll worry about the distortion later. So, everything is silent. Here's the lows. That's the frequency that one uses. This is supposed to be the mids. Might not be working quite the way I wanted. That's fine for now. And this is supposed to be the highs. We're supposed to be able to do this. And this is just everything. So, only bass. And this is fairly consistent. We're going to need to distort a little bit, but this is fairly consistent with what the real deal had. We're going to have another pull of filtering though. Here's the mids, a bit loud, and then only the highs. So the deal with the Mackie is that if you start boosting the bass and the highs, you will lose some mids. Mids just sit in the same place. So if we were to do this, have more bass, that will distort once we're finished with it. But you boost both of the things and you still have mid-range in there, or if you completely cut both of the things, you don't entirely isolate. Like they can be the same frequency or overlap. It's a fairly slow roll off. This requires a little more work here. But what we've got going on, in fact, let us use another thing. Let's go into the H file and use all the rest of these. So those are just going to be trim factors. And gain mid doesn't actually make any sense. So what we're going to do is adjust this again. We've moved everything, so now I need to adjust this so that it makes sense. There is no such thing as gain mid. Hang on, that was wrong. I shouldn't do that. I should do this. And let's add the extra gain, seeing as we can, but maybe not 10. It doesn't feel as if those EQs had that much gain on tap. It felt like they had less gain on tap than that. So we're going to try 2 for now. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all well and good. We're going to put this back now. Oh, here's another reason why it wasn't working right. I did not have high sample set up properly. There. That ought to behave a little better. I was running into a problem that didn't make sense, and that's almost certainly why. So, now we've got those, now we've got gain trims, and now we've got the capacity to distort everything independently. And we need to fix this bit, because I have this wrong. The danger with this kind of stuff is changing things around, getting lost, and then not knowing why it's not working and it never works again. That's no fun. That seems right. This should build. And this time I'll have that output gain in the lows on tap, as I know what was happening wrong the last time I tried this. So, I got kind of a lot of gain here, so it's. And now if I turn the gain on the bass up, or down. And this is probably going to be associated with the output level control too, because again, here's the gain, it's just distorting, and here's the output, just making it louder. Also, here's the high gain. Here's the high output. So the next thing that we do while we're throwing this all together, those are my distortions. I don't think I'm going to need anything more from that. We're probably going to gang the output levels and these distort levels on top of each other. But what we do with these final filters, and again, IR amount E and F, 2 and 3, those are going to end up being fixed frequencies. And now we're going to filter it again before, I think we are anyhow. Let's see. I'm going to want to filter this bass sample. See, what I'm doing is trying to figure out how to do an additional pole of filtering when I've been manipulating the stuff in the middle of it before assembling it back into a file again, because I don't want to just assemble it back, because if I just assemble it back, the distortion factors on the bass sample will get through into like high and stuff and then come through. I'd like to not do that. I'd like to do it differently. So we've got this one, which is my roll-off for the bass sample. And yeah, I think this ought to work. It's not that important as to whether it's perfect. What's important is whether it functionally works when we're done with it. So effectively what we've done is we've got our bass sample, it's our lows, that's one pole of filtering. This here is a pole of filtering. Then now that we've got it, we're distorting it, and then we're going to do another pole of filtering on it without worrying so much about how it relates to the other stuff. We're just going to filter it again so that any distortion is suppressed and the lows will tend to be enhanced. Meanwhile, high sample is mid sample minus this, and we fed mid sample into this. So we can feed see, if I feed high sample into that, that's not useful. And if I feed mid sample into it, I'm just working with what I haven't distorted yet. Hey, vinyl. So what gets fed into it is going to be something. But if it's mid sample, then what we've got is we were distorting the high sample. Maybe the clipping doesn't belong here. If I was to move it, what would happen? So there we've got our bass sample. It's been distorted. Hang on, let me roll that back. See, here's where we're starting. Our sample C, that is darkened, that is filtered. Bass sample equals that. Mid sample equals input sample minus bass sample. We take it away from the mids, and then we go from there to make the high frequencies. We've got another filter. Now we have the high frequencies. we can let's move this to after here. And let's comment it up. And I dare say I can move that too, because we're no longer using it anymore. So at this point, example, which is not from the distortion and not filtered an additional layer. Having done this, now we're working with mid sample, and high sample is, oh, I think I see something that is worth doing that I forgot to do, and I know why it's doing one of the things it's doing. High sample is what we started with, minus IR sample D, but then after that, I forgot to do this. See? Now, having done that, we're going to get a very different behavior. And assuming I leave stuff relatively normal, I can probably have it seem to make sense and demonstrate the thing I wanted to demonstrate. Back to this. I don't even know what you mean by auto gain function. Gain compensation is not relevant for this plugin. So here is the thing. This is what I was shooting for. If we listen to the bass, we have this. If we listen to the mids, hear how we can roll off the highs this way? That's what this needed to be. I had forgotten something. This needs to match what I had on the recording of the real device. And then lastly, highs is just this. And this is the cutoff for between the bass and the mids. And this is the cutoff between the mids and the highs. And I'll be dialing in what is the appropriate setting. So if we distort the bass, mid stays where it is. And this gives a certain blur to it. Let's boost everything. So what we're getting here, since we have base turned up, this is actually a factor of 2.0, and the output is turned all the way up. And these are padded down, these are darker, and high is not distorting. What's happening here is as we turn up the trim, we're clipping into the EQ circuit, and then we're filtering the clipping inside the EQ circuit. So the sort of wobbly distortiness is smoothed off. And the same should apply for the highs. And that's what we've got from this here. So we've got bass correct. We made the mids out of using the bass sample and then taking, subtracting it from mids right up here. Here's our filter. Here's getting mids from that. Then we're distorting it since we don't need to do anything further from, if we distort it, it'll change how the mids get working. Then we're filtering it again. So we distorted it and then we filtered again the lows, but it doesn't affect where we got the mids from. Now we have this here, which is the distortion of high sample. And how do we arrange this? Here is where we're making our high sample. So before we got to this point, mid was literally just mid-highs. It was both. And I needed to both take the filtered thing away from what we had and then also turn the filtered thing into what we're now using as the mid sample. So every step of the way, mid sample is being done with stuff that hasn't been distorted, but then we're immediately going and distorting the extra stuff we're doing. Which is done here. Although, another possibility is to do it before boosting it. because this goes to highs that can boost fairly hard. If I take, see here's the deal, like I've got a frequency, I've got a cutoff, and I've got distortion. So if I run a signal into a distortion, that produces higher overtones. If it's like a sine wave, it'll still produce higher overtones. If I run it through a filter, and the filter is above what the wave is, it'll make that be quieter and it won't clip. So I can have two different results from here. I can have it happen after the distortion, or I could have it happen before the distortion, which would then make it a sharper cutoff. And if I do it before the distortion, we can still, hang on. See, now I've got high sample, right? So I'll be feeding that into the second pole. Yeah, I think that's how this works. So we're feeding high sample into the second pole. That probably means I can cross it over lower, and that will be useful. And then the way we apply that, because right now we're doing this filtering and it doesn't do anything on the output. This is a convenient way to do that. So this is essentially the opposite of doing the filtering and just using it. If I went high sample equals IIR sample F, it would make it darker. Since I'm doing high sample minus equals IIR amount, sample, sorry. I know why I'm saying sorry. Sorry, algorithm. I wrote you wrong. High sample minus equals, that's an additional pole. We could keep doing this over and over again and making it steeper and steeper, although it'll never be that steep because it's a simple IIR filter here. The biquads are able to get steeper and get resonant. This can never get resonant. All it can do is just keep taking away. But we've now got mid sample, which nothing has been done to, and then high sample, which has been sort of double subtracted. High sample is already mid sample minus what this starts with. I'm also a little wary of the fact that I'm doing C, E, and then D, F. What does this mean? E and F are, no, that seems about right. I could fuss with this later. I'm just trying to make sure D and F are both the high frequency one. And sure enough, that seems correct. I might want to fiddle with that later. I can't stay too much longer today, but we're going to get something that you can hear on the output of this. And let's start facilitating the way that it really works already. We got gain base and gain high. And this is without going into the final stage. So there's going to be an additional level of tweak here, but see what we've got. We've got our EQ section, and So that might make a funny little irregularity. We'll see. But these filters are so shallow that it probably isn't going to make much of a difference. And as my final magical trick for today, let's see what we got. Let's step on out of here. Here's our comparison. And here's what we'll be doing. So the lows need to be boosted till you can do this with them. Full crank. That's what the lows sound like. And that's what boosts in the highs sound like. Now, these no longer do anything. This does. And gain bass and gain high are now our bass and treble controls on the actual Mackie. We still need to run into that output thing. It's a final clipping stage. Needs to sound kind of MIDI that way. We'll be adjusting this. These are going to be presets. Need to be able to boost that. And let's do one last thing while we can. You know, I've got the input sample here, so what we can do is just steal the clipping stage, and then we won't have a massive overload, although it's not going to be quite what we want, but it'll be pretty close. There. One final clipping stage without really filtering it properly. You can filter it later. Dialing this in can be next week, maybe. But for now, come on, you. What's it doing? I think I closed that window. Oh no. Fine. I'll go the long way around. There we go. So now it will clip rather than just overloading. I'll scooch it over so you can see the meters. And gain bass and gain high are reminiscent of our knobs. The amount of gain we've got, I don't know exactly what that's going to be. These are going to be the same. Input trim, like this is going to be 0.1, same as Mackity. These mean nothing anymore. Output pad and dry wet. So this is just the regular one. And then as we turn up the lows, MIDI, all lows. Yeah, this is starting to get into the zone. I've got all next week to dial it in. We'll tune it nicely. Also remember, I need to have the interstage filter. This is pushing too much extreme lows, and you can hear it. You shouldn't be able to push quite this much super lows. But it's doing the right basic thing here. And then as we distort it, we get pretty gnarly. Yeah, we definitely need another filter in there. And again, our comparison is this, which is a little quieter. But yeah. So that's the real thing. I think the principle is sound. So, there you have it. And with that, having gotten a result in about a little over 2 hours, I will catch up to you folks later. For now, that is the end of today's coding stream, and I dare say next week we will dial in things to make it match, to get it so that I'll like pay attention to which bits of the other folder, the other file, are which EQ settings, and I'll see to it that I can make all of the EQ settings be as exactly what I got off of the real device as I could. But this is workable. We'll be able to work with this. Before too terribly long, you should have the Mackie EQ and be able to stack those on top of each other and do all kinds of crazy drum and bass madness. And I'm sure that'll be fun for people. For now, I will talk to you folks later. Have fun and enjoy Mackity. That is out and operating. Laters.